Hospitals are places many people don't want to visit. Unless you're a medical professional, the thought of being in the antiseptic-scented hallways is enough to keep anyone away. However, if you do land in the hospital, you can be assured you'll be surrounded by caring nurses and crisp, clean bedding. However, not all hospitals can boast of this. In fact, the 5 former medical centers on this list are definitely places you don't want to end up in, whether injured or healthy. So let's take a stroll through the hallways of these 5 creepy abandoned hospitals in Europe. Just outside of Berlin is a hospital that opened 121 years ago and was left to rot for the last 25. Belitz was originally the largest hospital in the world for lung-related issues. It boasted 60 buildings over 494 acres, 200 hectares of landscaped gardens. During the first 25 years the hospital operated, it treated over 110,000 patients. During World War I, it was used as a military hospital. After the war, it was left abandoned for some time before being used as a military hospital again in World War II. It was eventually captured and occupied by the Soviet Army for 50 years, only to finally be abandoned for good in 1995. Some parts of the hospital have been reopened and repurposed, but the majority of the buildings are still in a state of ruin. Sanatorio de Valongo was built during the Estado Novo era in São Pedro da Cova in Portugal. This sanatorium only operated from 1958 to 1975 and has been abandoned since. In 1899, the Portuguese Queen established the National Institute of Assistance to Tuberculosis, leading to the birth of a few sanatoriums in the area, including Montalto. Construction didn't begin until 1932, though, and the hospital wasn't finished for another 25 years. Tuberculosis became much easier to treat by the time the 70s came, and very few patients were left. Initially, they had hoped to repurpose it as a psychiatric hospital, but it never came to fruition. The site was soon looted and eventually mostly destroyed by fire. More recently, suggestions were made to refurbish the building as a youth hostel, but once again these plans never came through. A large complex of 30 buildings lay across the site at Grabossi, north of Berlin in Germany. It began its life as a test facility to see whether the clean country air contributed to the treatment of respiratory issues. Once tests proved their theories to be correct, the hospital grew to house 300 patients. It was established by the German Red Cross in 1896, its most recent occupants being the Soviet Army, who utilized it as a military hospital. The site has been completely abandoned since reunification. Like most sanatorium sites, there has been no attempt to conserve the structures, and everything of value has been removed while the buildings crumble and nature slowly closes in around them. In Limbiate, not far from Milan, are the ruins of the Mombello Psychiatric Hospital, also known as Giuseppe Antonini Psychiatric Hospital, after its most influential director. The site of the hospital covers nearly 10 acres, 4 hectares, and can be traced back to the early Middle Ages when it was built originally as a fortress. Established in 1865, it served to replace Milan's main psychiatric hospital. The first patients, 300 of them, were transferred over in 1867. Over time, it became the largest psychiatric facility in the region, and when Signaur finally closed its doors in 1878, patient numbers exceeded 1,000. During World War I, the former psychiatric facility assigned 2 wards to soldiers traumatized by their time at war. After asylums in Venice were closed down, a ward was constructed for the displaced Venetians, and it was used to house World War II refugees. Today, the structures are in ruin and have been heavily vandalized, with all valuables from the site being stolen long ago. Zofiovka Sanatorium was founded in 1908 by the Society for the Protection of Mentally Ill Jews, built with funds donated by Zofia Endelman. Its original use was as a sanatorium for Polish Jews with psychological issues. Built on 74 acres, 30 hectares of land, it employed 994 staff at its busiest point. It made use of the more modern practices being developed at the time, like electroshock therapy. However, it eventually became used for even more sinister purposes. Zofioka ended up being the only Jewish psychiatric facility in the entirety of occupied Poland. Conditions were atrocious, with disease and starvation killing most of the patients. 210 to be exact. After this, it was used to raise Polish children as a way to assimilate them. Eventually, the war ended, and the hospital was deserted. Over time, it has been repurposed to treat tuberculosis, addicts, and youth with psychological conditions before being closed forever in the mid-1990s.